Okay, let's begin. Thank you all for joining our webinar today, provided by SalesLayer. The title of the webinar is Challenges for E-commerce in 2020, Surviving in the Amazon Era, which can be very scary for some. My name is Pons. I've recently joined SalesLayer in May, but a brief history. I've worked within the e-commerce ecosystem, quote unquote, for the past 10 years now. I've worked for companies that do data feed management. I've worked for companies on the fulfillment side. I've come across many different retailers and brands within this past 10 years. And I really looked in the past couple of months at what some of the trends might be for e-commerce in the next year, right? We saw a big shift when it came to e-commerce in the past couple of years, due of course to the pandemic. So now it's about looking ahead and trying to predict what those trends will be. So I hope you very much do enjoy the webinar. Some of the topics that we'll be covering today are one-time shoppers, delivery, omnichannel, and personalization within the omnichannel. Physical shopping, which surprise, is back. Payments, voice commerce, and of course, product content. Now, please do type your questions in the question box as you have them as we go through. I will look to answer as many questions as I possibly can at the end. We'll probably take about 30 minutes on the actual content itself, and I'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions afterwards. So as we're going along, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the box and I'll try to get into as many of them as possible. So let's begin. Let's talk about one-time shoppers, right? This is a huge thing to be cautious of and to beware. We all know the upward trends when it comes to e-commerce sales in the past few years. 2020 and 2021, however, got a huge boost. So to put this into perspective, online sales in the US grew in 1 quarter what it did the previous 10 years. That's massive. So many brands and retailers sat back and enjoyed the joyride. I know many of you on this webinar have as well. You must have all been on overdrive, though, working very hard and probably never worked as much as you did before. But there is a bit of caution here. Let's not get too comfortable because there is risk ahead. And that risk is that about 3 out of 4 consumers will not shop from the same online shop again. This is attributed to many different factors. Increasing competition is definitely one of them. Your biggest competitor being large marketplaces like Amazon, for one. And with the 2020 shift, we saw companies become much fiercer when it comes to strategy in retaining customers. Relevant messaging plays a huge role in retaining these customers. Are you, for example, providing value in your messaging post-sales? What kind of content are you providing shoppers when it comes to the post-sale? If you start with the strategy that is just to sell again immediately, you're going about it in the wrong way, right? It's not necessarily about sell again. It's about what value can I actually provide this shopper so that they will return. And in terms of that, we need to think about brand messaging, right? So if your brand story or values are solid and they're interesting, that would be great messaging to include. Furthermore, and probably most importantly, is the experience that they get, and that relates to customer service. A simple thank you note actually goes a long way. Another thing that is helpful is to leverage discounts after they have received their order. Referral campaigns are paramount as well to many companies in generating loyalty as well as getting new customers. So if your margins are big enough, then I'd highly suggest a member get member campaign / referral campaign. And lastly, when it comes to one-time shoppers, beware, right? There's no you have to be proactive, let's say, right? So Again, there's no argument. There is an argument for not volunteering a problem where there isn't one. But the brands that do best always anticipate any issues. So get ahead of that. For example, if your product requires assembly, ask them if they need assistance or ask them how their shopping experience was, right? So get ahead of any problems before they actually come to you. The more touch points you have, the better your chances actually increase of getting those shoppers again. And delivery is also a huge aspect in getting repeat customers as well. And we'll discuss that in our next topic. So what we'll see again here for one-time shoppers is a trend in increased and proactive touch points, as well as the delivery experience, which we'll touch upon now, right? So let's talk about the delivery and last mile, right? Okay. Now, with the steep rise of online shopping, the only interaction many customers will have with your brand is during the delivery. This makes the fulfillment process one of the most important things to consider, and even more so when you have the likes of Amazon. Let's look at the 3 pillars of Amazon. We all know them very well, right? Price, selection, which means variety, and convenience. And the convenience bit is hugely related to delivery. You can order something today and know that it will be delivered tomorrow. There are different types of shoppers, of course. For simplicity, let's categorize them into 2 categories. There's the Amazon shopper, many of them Prime, that are looking for their items the next day at no additional cost other than a Prime membership. And then there's the eBay or Mercado Libre shopper, right? And these people are looking for bargains, and therefore they're happy to wait, let's say 3 to 5 days, because they understand that there is a trade-off. But things such as free shipping do play a key factor when making a purchasing decision. 53% of consumers choose to shop on certain websites because they have free shipping options. In fact, having a few different options for shoppers is key. They want to know that they can choose. They have a variety of options, what's best for them, or very well near that. Too few options will actually guide people to actually abandon their baskets even after they decided to purchase. And back again to having too many options. What happens when you have too many options is the dwell time increases, and you're looking at more time for them to get distracted on something else. I always say that consumers like to be herded. They want to feel that they have control whilst being herded into the option that most retailers want them to take, but they also hate having too few options. So essentially, they like to be herded, but they don't want to feel forced into something with too few options. So back on the delivery point, same-day delivery cannot be ignored. Just having the option there makes a huge impact, let alone there is the fact that 83% of consumers will pay for same-day delivery. Now, very relational to basket size, but we will see the tipping point drop in basket sizes. So for example, typical basket size where people are willing to pay for same-day delivery is about 90 to 100 pounds, dollars, euros, whatever it is. That starts to be the tipping point where people will pay for same-day delivery. Because it does cost companies, and this cost is then passed on to the consumer anywhere between 8 to 10 euro, for example, to get stuff out the actual same day. There are many options that retailers do have to orchestrate those, so it's worth looking into companies such as Bring or Line 10 that can help with ensuring efficient and quick delivery, but also the important aspect of customer communication throughout. We all hate late deliveries, right? I hate having ordered something and it not being arrived on the same day that I ordered it, or even within the same time slot. But I, like many consumers, are actually okay with something being late if there is a proactive communication of this. So having something that orchestrates your fulfillment much better with a much more communicative approach will go miles with consumers. And on that topic, right, packaging will become increasingly important during the delivery process. For starters, is your packaging personalized? to your brand? And even for your customer, or is it just a plain box? Right? You might have had a seamless delivery experience, but does the customer have that warm feeling and connection with your brand when they receive the parcel? I, for one, get extremely excited about receiving an item that I bought. Even after being a Prime customer for years and ordering day-to-day things, it's still something that not just I get excited about, but the vast majority of shoppers do. It's that fuzzy feeling you get when opening something that's nicely packaged and branded. Even if you're selling products that aren't your own as a retailer, the outer packaging should be attractive and very well branded. Now, there's also the aspect of eco-friendly packaging. A considerable amount of customers will pay attention to the packaging that was used and how eco-friendly it is. I don't know if many of you remember those ridiculously sized boxes for small items that Amazon used to do. It certainly was a topic of conversation with a lot of people, very much like Starbucks getting people's name wrong on coffee cups. But these things actually got people talking and was great promotion for these companies. But as time went on, it actually started to backfire on Amazon. So wasted plastic and packaging in general are ever more noticeable. And consumers are much more likely to stick around if you use eco-friendly packaging. Things like reusable packaging as well, if you encounter returns, will really make you stand out. So the trend here will be quicker delivery options as well as personalized and eco-friendly packaging. Now, moving on to omnichannel strategies with personalization. We've heard about omnichannel strategies for years now and the importance of it, but we still see a huge amount of brands that have no real strategy for this. There's a few different reasons for why this might be the case. Margins are a big reason. If you have high volume but low margins, such as consumer electronics, for example, selling on different channels will have your margin take a huge hit. And even more so if, for example, you're using fulfillment by Amazon. Again, you'll need to appeal to the Prime shopper. So therefore, not using FBA will also decrease your sales naturally. You made a decision to go on Amazon, that might take a hit to your margin. And then you're still not getting a lot of orders. Why? Because you're not using FBA, therefore not being viewed with people that are only looking for Prime shoppers. So that, for example, is something to be very aware of, right? But it's a trade-off that sometimes you have to make. There's also the fact of not wanting to use various different channels, of the point of not owning the customer. So when you sell on different channels, there is no chance of actually owning the customer. Because after all, if someone buys your product from a marketplace, they're the marketplace's customers, not yours. You get no visibility into any insights such as demographics, and you can't build any type of connection with them. And you also give a lot of data away, which can and will be used against you when factoring, for example, white label products. Amazon, for example, has started making their own brands, and they've been very well known to force third-party sellers to going first-party if a product is performing well. What does that mean? That means that if they see your product performing well as a seller, they will turn around to you and say, you have to sell it to us first-party and wholesale it to us, or nothing at all, or you can't even be a third-party seller. So they've been known to really force their way with a lot of brands and retailers. There's also, lastly, the reason that many brands don't want to create friction with their retailers by being seen as competing with them. So as traditional retail, though, as we know it, is ever more changing, now is the time to act if you have it, right? And some numbers that will convince you, for example, are 47% of product searches now starts on a marketplace such as Amazon and eBay. This number goes over 50% if you're, for example, in the UK or the US. Right, third party. So just over half of Amazon sales comes from third parties. So that's a huge amount, and that's a big reason as to why you should be using different channels. For those that aren't aware, a third-party seller is an independent company that lists their products on Amazon versus Amazon buying those products and then selling them. Now, I know the title of this webinar mentions Amazon and how you can compete or survive for that matter, but companies like Amazon are a necessary evil, right? But in addition, there's thousands of other marketplaces that you should be looking at working with. And we also see companies, for example, that are connecting to traditional food marketplaces. Boots, a major retailer in the UK, started selling their cosmetics and basic items on Deliveroo, which is a traditional food delivery platform. Why did they do this? Well, they saw it as incremental revenue that adds up, and you really cannot ignore that. Okay, but now let's say you do actually have an omni-channel strategy in place. You already sell through various different channels. You've gone past that hurdle. It's no longer good enough, right, just to have that. You may have heard about personalization and maybe have implemented it yourself. What is personalization? Well, the prospective consumers get the same consistency through and through versus in these multiple channels. If they don't, then you're clearly doing something wrong, because creating consistency in your messaging and personalization throughout all these different channels will really get you light years ahead. You can really start to generate customer loyalty, which in turn will lead to repeat sales. So there needs to be ways of personalizing relevant messages across multiple channels. Knowing the demographics and having tracking here will allow you to keep personalized messaging throughout all channels, as well as those that you advertise on, right? Take a very basic example as Facebook Pixel, for example, which gives you loads and loads of demographics that you can then use to break it down into personalized messaging when it comes to the omnichannel. So an increased omnichannel presence with personalization will be a big topic for 2022. Now, the return to physical stores and shopping. Well, the floodgates have opened again. People are back on the streets and retail has recovered. Will it be the same in the long run? Of course not. That would actually go against the advancement in e-commerce that we spoke about earlier. But here's a few numbers for you though. So retail sales grew sharply in April with a monthly increase of about 9.2%. Right, and we actually saw a steep rise in non-food retail sales. So these aren't people going back to supermarkets again. These are people that are in the fashion industry, for example, which saw like 69% growth into in-store shopping and around 25% across retail as a whole. Now, one might say going from zero to something will obviously have a huge percentage impact, but it's undeniable that retail is still around. And as you can see here, retail sales, for example, in Great Britain actually started to surpass, right, quarters from before. Now, looking back to our friends Amazon has actually opened what they call 4-star stores in the US, and they're first in the UK last month. The reason they call them 4-star stores are because they only sell products there that are rated 4 stars and above, right? So they're looking at higher valued items that have good ratings. What they will sell in these stores will also change frequently, and there will be a mix of the products that they sell. So one might think, okay, they're going to sell their own Amazon branded products because they know these products perform well, so much so that they've made them themselves and now branded them. But they're also going to use local third-party sellers' products to sell in stores. Why is Amazon doing this? Well, for starters, it's nothing more than an experiment. However, it is an experiment because they do potentially see something there in traditional brick and mortar stores, right? So they're looking at gathering as much data into the brick and mortar space, which is something that they really don't have on their own. right? Amazon wants to have their own data, they want to have their own experiences, and they want to see how both the e-commerce world and the physical retail world interact. And if they do make a decision to go fully into brick and mortar and opening loads of shops, this will most likely be something that they did with wholesale, right? So they'll acquire something to do it big and fast, right? So now taking a step back into off of Amazon and into traditional retail, let's talk about the robo consumer. What does robo mean? Well, robo means research online and buy and the buy online shopper, right? What strategy do you have for what strategy do you have for these type of shoppers? Well, quite frankly, it's something that you need to have. So first, you might want to think about how you can drive the robo shopper in store, right? So is your mobile site friendly and intuitive, and can it display product information clearly? And most importantly, completely, so that those that are researching are online and buying in store, for example, so a different type of shopper, have enough information to drive them to visit a brick and mortar store. This helps to create a satisfying experience with shoppers. Next, you might want to look at helping those that actually come in store. So for example, the best thing for this type of omni-channel experience is to have kiosks in stores. Because after all, they were researching on mobile phones, tablets, and laptops. So having that link is hugely important, right? Because it allows for in-store buying and researching. In fact, the kiosk market in itself is due to grow roughly about $9 billion in the next 5 years. So anything you can do by making this process easier and also equipping floor staff with handheld devices that allows for inventory management will really work wonders for you, as well as having a much easier click and collect process if you don't already have one. Okay, so let's look at now into payments, right? The boring part. But is it boring? Well, no, it's just a fact of life. It's part of the buyer journey, and actually the last before delivery. So you've done all this hard work. You've gotten customers to your website. You've gotten a consumer to actually decide to buy. Now it's time to keep your eye on the prize and create an easy purchasing experience when it comes to paying. Right? So creating a seamless experience starts with actually looking at the reasons why people abandon carts when it comes to payments, right? Hidden costs are a huge part, and this has nothing to do with shipping. This is actually having to do with charging more for certain types of payments, not enough payment options. Is your site secure enough? Also, look at how easy it is to buy without too much information, without having to give too much information, right? So again, you remember when we were talking about marketplaces, we were talking about not owning the customer and having zero customer data, and that is key. But for a first-time customer, think hard about your strategy when it comes to, for example, requiring them to create an account, right? Because losing 37% of people trying to get as much information as possible is paramount. I mean, you already have their email addresses because you need it. So, and you most likely have a good enough of demographic information. So for that first time shopper, linking back again to those people that are first time and might not come back, it's really paramount that you get that. Well, that there's a trade-off, of the information that you get from them without pushing it too hard. Okay, so really think balance for them. So streamlining the payment process will be a key trend, as well as fraud prevention on payments, right? So ensure you do have the right technology for that. Okay, so there you go again, curated payments. Again, no hidden costs, having several options, and site security is going to be the biggest trend we're going to see in 2022 when it comes to payments. And now the rise of voice, right? So voice shopping has been around for around 7 years now, I think. A lot of people started using this technology as far back as 2017, right? Actually using it to make purchases. So the voice technology has been there for years, and then to start using that for purchases, people started doing that in around 2017. The interesting thing, though, is that voice shopping will increase, right, 55% in 2022. The main verticals here being homeware, food items, and low-cost electronics. That's really interesting, though, because with voice shopping, consumers have no images, they can't read any data, and have to describe the item that they want to buy. So if your product data and keywords aren't there, you won't stand a chance with voice shoppers, right? Just to look quickly at the global smart speaker market share, Google being the predominant one, let's say in 2022. So Google has overtaken Amazon. So we'll talk about Google right now as far as getting and converting voice shoppers, right? So for example, the tip here would be to get placed into Google's featured snippet box. Google has a snippet box when it comes to linking product information and websites into the Google Home. So getting featured here is almost like being in position 0. That is like the spots that you want to get to. So that means that when you're placed here, it's because your answers for a search term are the best, right? And the way to get here is actually by answering questions in your own content. So you actually have to think a bit differently now. So within your own content, in your website or your blog, using a list, if possible, on your content is really key, with a short introduction of around 40 to 50 words. And also look at a range of Google snippets and optimize your product content with the correct markup there, right? You also have to remember that a typed search is very different than a voice search. So we type questions and it corresponds to, let's say, a directory. A voice search, though, is much more conversational. It's like myself having a conversation with my Alexa at home. So having a conversational tone in your blog, for example, and your product descriptions will actually really help you out here, right? And then let's look at the reason behind searches. So search engines are more and more looking to humanize queries. They're looking at understanding what the reasons behind the search really are. So avoiding keywords that are robotic in nature. Example, paella best recipe, right? Try a conversational approach for keywords, right? Such as, what is the best recipe for paella? So that's one example of how you can change your product information and your keywords to become a lot more humanized, right? And make you stand out when it comes to voice searches. Okay, moving on to product content, the ever important product content. This is the foundation of the whole e-commerce experience, and it's key. So to lay out a foundation with good product information is to lay a good foundation. We've touched up on product data in all of the segments because it's actually paramount to your success. What we're seeing is a huge rise of people needing to manage their product information better. To put this into perspective, only 30% of companies today are using a PIM, or a product information management software. So that means that 70% of companies are still using Excel, Google Sheets, documents, loose images, and they're being passed around to anywhere between 10 and 80 people in the company. And then maybe they're using a software like Jira, for example, to managing workflows. So you have all of these different data sets being managed in different documents by different people, then putting onto Jira to then pass them along, right? So actually stop to think about here the amount of time that is taking companies and employees to manage all of this. and the huge room that there are for errors in this, right? So up to 70% of a department, when we look at a department, be it a marketing department or a product marketing or even copywriters. So up to 70% of that department's time can be spent on touching on product data, right? And it's spent managing this, and not only that, but constantly fixing errors. And then if you work in fast fashion, it all starts over again in 6 weeks. So another very good reason to manage your product data is that 4 out of 5 shoppers will not buy an item, right, or a product if the product data is incomplete and or not enriched. So think about that, for example, for a second. 80% of people won't purchase your product information. They won't purchase your product if the information isn't up to scratch. Not only that, they won't come back if their expectations aren't fulfilled. So they won't even return to your website, right? But you can't stop there. You have to consider many things, not just the product description. You have to consider images, videos, tutorials, reviews, testimonials, and that's a lot to manage. And if we link back to the one-time shopper, there's also the aspect of returns, right? So if you think about the fact that besides faulty items, the biggest reason for returns is a product not being as described, whether it's the wrong size, whether it's just not having enough information there to match it to the image, for example. So can you really afford the extra cost and the burden that puts on you? I wouldn't, for example. I couldn't afford that. And I've spoken to many companies who have a very big nightmare when it comes to having dozens of documents and people collaborating on these documents. Because after you have all the data, you have it all centralized, for example, and everybody's managing in the same location, you then have to think about exporting that data, right? So going back to the Omnichannel, you now have to export that, let's say, into up to 80 to 100 different channels as well. So that can also create a nightmare because, for example, every single channel has their own way of reading and displaying your product data differently. A very basic example, Amazon up until, let's say, a year or two ago, couldn't read product data that said that was lavender or lilac, for example. It could only read and display solid colors, right? So if you had a product description there, it then needed to translate into what Amazon read and displayed, and you ended up not even having your sweater being displayed, for example, if you hadn't taken the time to then put it into the right feed and the right context, right? eBay then reads the data completely different, as does El Corte Inglés, as does Walmart, etc., etc., etc. And then also, if you're in the B2B space, you also have catalogs that need to be created, right? So you have your sales team, you have your different retailers, for example, that you sell into, and those catalogs, for example, need to be created in an instant. But then again, somebody has to stop, they have to go create that catalog, and it takes them actually much more than minutes. It could take them hours to create catalogs. So some people have to then flip through manual catalogs, for example. So a PIM here is key, and that's why the PIM market is actually growing at an absurdly compound rate. And that's due to the sheer necessity of getting the foundations right when it comes to e-commerce. Okay, so there you go. There you have it. Typical product information management in a company. Excel spreadsheets, 80 plus people sometimes touching it, and lots of files and repositories. So centralizing, having one source of truth for your product data is paramount, right? So you get all of your product content, you put that into a PIM system, and that will then spit it correctly into all of the channels. All right, thank you everybody for joining and for being here. I think we have a few questions here, so I'm going to Open up the question. Okay. You mentioned one-time shoppers. What happens if I'm a seasonal retailer though? It's still the same. If you're a seasonal retailer, if you sell Halloween items, for example, and you haven't managed that feedback consistently, right? For when and you haven't managed that constant communication with the customer, uh, progressively and added value throughout the years, they'll forget about you. They will forget about you when it comes time to Halloween again, but they will remember the exceptional customer service experience and those value touch points. Example would be sending an email for best costume ideas, etc. Right? We have another question here. We've always worked just fine using Google Sheets and image links. Why should I be investing in something when we get on as we are? Fair enough. That can happen for retailers, for example, and brands that have less than 1,000 SKUs that can easily be managed. But let's look at the omni-channel, let's look at different channels and then expanding into different countries, for example. What happens then when you then have that product information and you need to translate it? Now, I started selling in Spain, I've started selling in Brazil, and I've started selling in France. So now you have that product information that you now need to manage over 3, 4, 5 different languages. And that's when it starts to get tricky, right? And then within those countries, you then have different channels that you need to feed it out to. So that's why looking at a PIM, if you're looking at expanding, can be key. So thanks for those questions. If there's any more, please do let me know. Obviously, feel free to write to me in case you need to, in case a question pops up. My email is displayed there. It's been a real pleasure having everybody here today. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you've gained some insight into the 2022 e-commerce trends, and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Thank you so much.